Okay, so I'm going to respond to this comment, but there's also a secondary comment from the same user that says, once anxiety is in your chart, good luck getting rid of it. And I just want to acknowledge that, yes, it is incredibly difficult because once the diagnosis is like listed in your chart, or once you were written off as being anxious, it's always going to be there. So I went back and I read my clinical notes and my aftercare summaries from all of my doctor's visits, and it is in there. It will show like, hey, 30-something-year-old woman presenting with XYZ symptoms as well as anxiety. But what was really helpful for me is that I went and got a neuropsych eval done. Now, when I first got the referral from the ER, I straight up was like, no, we're not doing this. And then I figured, why not? So I went to go get a neuropsych eval, and the absolute hilarious part for me is that when I did the entire evaluation, they did not come up with a diagnosis of anxiety. Nothing. I did the entire evaluation, and what they came back with was ADHD and attentive type, which, to be honest, was not that surprising. But the fact that there was no anxiety diagnosis that came out of that evaluation, that is what gave me the courage and the fortitude to go back into doctors' offices and change how I talk to them. So one of the first things that I do when I go into a doctor's office now, as they're pulling up my chart, is I literally say, I understand that you're going to view my chart and think that I am anxious. I completely understand that, because you're going to open up my chart and you're going to see that there's this woman who has had X amount of doctor's appointments. And then the next thing I say is, I am not anxious. And if they do not believe me, a lot of the times I will ask, what part of me presenting with you right now is anxious? What do you consider an anxious presentation? And part of the reason I do that is because as a therapist, I'm very well versed in anxiety presentations. But I've never had a doctor give me an adequate response that I was presenting with anxiety. So even when someone says, oh, you're just going through it, I'm like, oh, cool, but what does that mean to you? Am I presenting as overly worried and fixated on a topic? Or am I simply articulating that these are the symptoms that are coming up? Do I have an elevated heart rate, or is this heart rate in line with the symptoms that I typically present? Do I have sweaty palms and you think that I'm having an anxious reaction? Or can I actually articulate to you that the time that we have this appointment is right in the window where if I don't eat something, I'm going to pass out? And that is where I start to get into this space of saying, yes, I understand, but. And having that neuropsych eval in my back pocket and knowing that I was not diagnosed with anxiety has been incredibly helpful. It has also allowed me to further embrace the acceptance of my symptoms and not write myself off. And now when I'm going into doctor's offices, that's the first thing I do. I literally just say, I understand that you're going to read this as anxiety, and I am safely telling you that it is not. And having the neuropsych eval to back it up is incredibly helpful. I do not think that it should be necessary that we all go get neuropsych evals in order to prove that, because that is just so frustrating, right? You want to go into a space and you want a doctor to understand you and to not write you off because your symptoms are presenting as an anxious response. So if you're unable to get a neuropsych eval, or you just don't want to do it, which I definitely did not want to do it, something that I find to just be really helpful is asking what the doctor considers to be anxiety. And then understanding how you present with anxiety if and when you do. So my anxious response tends to be kind of like a non-POTS response, tends to be very fidgety, or I just can't sit still. My chest starts to feel really tight, and I have a ton of difficulty focusing. So when I ask a doctor, am I presenting as anxious to you right now? What I'm really doing is asking, what do you see in me? That way I can explain to you, this is how I present when I'm anxious. And that ability to close the gap between the two things has been a game changer, because now I'm kind of challenging the doctor to come to a different conclusion than the assumption that they were leading with.